Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning and welcome to Encounter. I'm your host today, Joe Sellepack. I'm the Executive Director at the Broome County Council of Churches. When I was reading the most recent Christian Century, one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting was a little snippet on those who are seeking spiritual direction. It seems that there's a lot of people today who are hungry for a more deeper spiritual connection. However, many of them have had various experiences with the church that have not necessarily been helpful for them on their spiritual journey. And they've been relegated to being outsiders or people who have feel like there is a God, but they don't necessarily know how to connect to that God. And one of the works that I've recently come across is a book called Healing Spiritual Wounds: Reconnecting with a Loving God After Experiencing a Hurtful Church. I reached out to the author. Her name is Reverend Carol Howard Merritt, and she agreed to be on Encounter with us today. So Carol has been a frequent lecturer, speaker at various retreats and conferences, and as well as a prolific writer. She's gotten some awards for her book. And Carol, welcome to Encounter today.
Thank you, Joe. It's great to be on. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so happy. And just so that everyone knows, you can find her book on Amazon. I got it on my I actually read it on my phone. So it's something that you can get electronically, as well as something that for all of you that like a hard copy of the book, you can probably get it from Amazon as well, or from one of our local bookstores. So Carol, do you want to talk a little bit about why you wrote the book?
Yeah, first of all, as a pastor, I was constantly getting people in my office who were struggling. And, many times we have physical struggles or physical wounds that we see, and we know exactly what to do, or we might have psychological wounds, and there's a lot of wisdom and science going into that. But I was finding people with spiritual wounds, and it didn't quite fit into a psychological wound. It didn't quite fit into, it was just something different. And I was also noticing them in myself. My father was dying, and I was raised in a very volatile household. It could be very violent, and many times the church was giving us counseling that was not helpful, and it was actually contributing to the abuse. And so, that's wasn't something I could exactly talk to my therapist about. And
Right.
I did, they couldn't quite get to what I was struggling with. So I began to think about this aspect of spiritual wounds, and it is in no way wanting to overtake psychological counseling or therapy, or certainly not a medical doctor.
Right.
But just this idea that there is this other thing, right? This place where we are wounded, and we don't always have the words, and we don't always have the places to go in order to find a balm, in order to find healing.
Right. And really, I mean, when I was reading the book, one of the thoughts that I had was, one of my heroes is a guy named William Stringfellow, and William Stringfellow had had a quote where he talks about all theology begins in biography. And I thought that was kind of an interesting thing throughout the book, was that you kept bringing your story back in. And you start off talking about that painful experience at the beginning of the book, but then I took it that perhaps maybe even through your own personal story and retelling it, you were kind of talking about your own personal healing as well, and maybe using yourself as a guinea pig, perhaps. Like this is what I did, and this is what worked for me, and it might work for you too if you want to go on this journey with me. And is that fair? Is that a fair assessment of what the book might have been and what it might be for others?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a theological aspect to it for me as well. I'm Presbyterian, and there's different ways to read Calvin, John Calvin, and there's talk about spiritual abuse. There's some spiritually abusive Calvinists, but there's also some very enlightened ways to read Calvin, and he starts out the Institutes by saying, to know God, you must know yourself.
Oh, yeah.
There's this sense of, and he really does a lot of like soul anatomy through his Psalms and his commentaries of the Psalms. And so there is this like theological tradition of really delving deep into theology and into, what we are going on in ourselves. And I really loved the mystics and the people who do that as a genre. There's also a practical thing, I can't tell the stories of parishioners. I mean, sometimes I might let them slip in, or really change all of the descriptions, but those are sacred stories,
right.
And very confidential. So so it was easier to track down my family and say, hey, is it okay if I tell these stories?
Well, it's what they say about pastors' kids, right? Is that they are always, anything that they say is open game for a sermon illustration. So they kind of figure that out after a while. So they stop talking to you. Just kidding.
Yeah.
Just kidding. My kids and I seem to have a good relationship, so they don't get in that kind of way. But anyway, so Carol, how important is spiritual direction for people? I mean, it seems like, that quote, what the Christian Century, that little snippet about how hungry people are for a deeper understanding of God, and deeper understanding of themselves. In the pandemic, it's kind of heightened the entire approach. So, how important is it to find someone who can help you negotiate that, or to find, like even this book that you wrote, it is a primer, it's a workbook. There's lots of different exercises that you bring in, and a lot of different things like that. How important is that?
I think it's extremely important right now, since the Enlightenment, which I think is a very good thing. But since the Enlightenment, we've had such a shift of focus from kind of the mystery and the theological and the mystical. And we've shifted the focus to the scientific, the proven, and I'm not anti-science at all. But we are missing that mystical element, that spiritual element. But our we haven't changed.
Right.
Around us has changed, but we still have those same longings and hunger, and really yearnings to connect with God in a deeper sense. And so I think that more and more, someone has done studies on previous pandemics and previous crises where there's often a spiritual renewal because people understand how dry they've become. And so, I really welcome anything that sort of wakes us up to either the necessity or the presence of God around us.
So one of the stories that did come up in your book involved a Navy man in a party, and you talking with him about his own spiritual journey, and he had grown up in a very strict household as far as religion was concerned, and was gay, and that was a barrier for him. His father and his family had kind of almost rejected him, and but yet he still felt connected to God somehow, or had questions about God and needed help. And through your ministry with him, you were able to help him understand a little bit more about his place within God's love, which I thought was just a beautiful thing. I thought that the story itself was really, really touching. Do other people that you've met have that same that love-hate thing, and needing to somehow reconcile it, within themselves, so that they can kind of find that healing that you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the greatest things about being a minister is that as soon as people meet you, they have this reaction, and sometimes it's really awkward and not so great. But oftentimes you suddenly find yourself in the midst of these like precious moments where you are beginning to really have you really have these moments where that are pretty intense, and that was one of those. And certainly inside the church, outside the church, people you meet, ministers themselves have both a love-hate relationship with the church many times. I think of it as a stream, and right. There's oftentimes a toxic stream, and there's also a life-giving stream, and right. They're kind of running concurrently. And that's part of the messiness of being human, but it's also something that we have to be aware of and have to be very understanding of in our church situations.
And not all of those situations seem to be the same. Like that one was, of a gay man who was raised inside of a church. For others, it may be someone who's just been through a bad church council meeting, or even someone whose family is somewhat ostracized because of something that occurred that they had no control over, and the church reacted in a certain way toward them. It could be anything that kind of that experience that kind of triggers that feeling of love, hate kind of thing. And so it's not always the big things. It's sometimes very, very, very interesting things. Yeah. Interesting is one of those words that can cut across just about everything, right? So like in your experience, you are a pastor at Bedford Presbyterian Church in New York, in Westchester County, New York. So, what do you think about the church? What is it about the church that kind of leads itself toward those kinds of experiences, I guess?
Yeah, I'm thinking of this really funny guy who decided to join the church, and he's like, yeah, I haven't been to the church in like 20 years. And I said, oh, really? And we were talking about it. And he said, yeah, I remember when I was young, my parents couldn't afford shoes. And we had a big family. And so we were always passing down the shoes. And somebody in the church made a comment about not wearing nice enough shoes. And he said, now that it's been 20 years, it's probably time to get over that. Which was true, but at the same time, that was a very precious time for this kid to be, humiliated at church, and we don't always understand the impact that we have on one another inside church, but we're coming together in these incredibly tender moments. I mean, think about it. Church rituals are always around, the birth or the death or Christmas or Easter. And, these are times not just inside the church walls, but these are times within our families. These are times when, depression rates go up and anxiety goes up in our culture. And there's so much tenderness involved in these particular situations. And or coming of age, whether it's a confirmation or whatever way your church might celebrate this sort of coming of age. But they are both times that are just incredibly wonderful and can be very damaging, very difficult. Yeah. And I remember when I was, before I had a baby and I was a pastor, and I used to be a little bit cynical about how people would come to church after they had a kid. And then I realized, what a spiritually monumental process that is having a child or adopting a child or starting a family. And all of a sudden you become more spiritually aware. So I think, it's in times of crisis, it's in times of great tenderness that we come to church, especially now that it is socially less expected to come on a regular weekly basis.
Now, one of the things that our listeners may not know about is the fact that when I was in seminary, I did an internship once before I was the Reverend Doctor. I was a lowly intern, and I would get coffee for people, and I would do all kinds of things for them. I worked, I was the gopher for the office, and it was at a church. It was LaSalle Street Church, which plays a prominent role within your story as you're talking about it. You were a student at Moody, and Moody, I don't know if you know the history of LaSalle Street Church and Moody. They were actually connected through the ministry of Bill Leslie for a period of time, but we shared that experience. We were both at LaSalle. I was there 92 was when I was there on staff. So it was one of those churches that kind of helped me maybe integrate a little bit in my own theological journey, which I grew up very similarly to you. I think were you in a Pentecostal type church or something like that?
Yeah, Baptist and charismatic. My parents were church hoppers. So
yeah, mine too. So we were Christian Missionary Alliance. We were Wesleyan. I went to a Baptist school, very, very kind of traditional fundamentalist holiness kind of places. And so, one of the
mutts.
Yeah, spiritual mutts is what I kind of view myself as. And but LaSalle Street kind of helped me integrate some of my thinking, especially as far as justice and treatment to the poor, place of women within ministry, all kinds of things that were part of living in Chicago. You don't find that in Taylor, Michigan, but you do find that in Chicago. And can you share a little bit about the importance of these churches, these places of healing that we find, and those types of experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think LaSalle has ended up being, a place of healing for a lot of Moody students that kind of, become a little bit heretical and walk down. At the time, Philip Yancey was there, so we were probably there around the same time. I think I was there 91, 92, around then. So maybe I was a little bit before you. But absolutely, it has been just a beautiful place in my life. And for me, particularly, it was the first place where I really saw a woman preach. And I remember, I had a friend who was telling me, she was kind of coaxing me out of fundamentalism, and I had this call to ministry, but I didn't know what to do with it. And if you're Baptist and you're a woman and you have a call to ministry, then you go on the mission field.
Right.
I was beginning to have like all sorts of questions about colonialism and what all of that was about. And so I was in a huge, just quandary. And I had a friend who said, "Oh, just find a place where there's a woman minister. Just like get over this." So I walked down to LaSalle Street Church, and there was a woman minister. And not only was she a woman, but she was great. She was a great preacher, and I loved listening to her. And she did some amazing things. I remember when Bill Leslie left, she got up and she just told the story of Babette's Feast. In fact, she memorized it. Yeah, it was just,
what a great story that is.
Yes, it was amazing. And so
actually, I was there for that. So we were probably both in the same sermon. So anyway.
So I just remember, she was sort of the first person to open my eyes. And the funny thing is 20 years later, I was writing about this very story, and I got an email in my popped up in my notifications, and I got on there, and it asked me if I wanted to teach a class for a doctorate of ministry. And I said, "Oh yeah, I'd love to do that." And the person said, "Oh, that's so good, because I have not been a pastor for 20 years when I was at LaSalle Street Church." And I was like, it was the same woman. It was Annette Heisinger. And, and I just started like yelling and calling my husband. "You don't believe what just happened." So it continues to impact my life in great ways.
So is Annette Heisinger was the minister who we're referring to.
Right?
Is she still at Dubuque?
She is still at Dubuque. She's the dean now.
Oh, okay, very cool. Her husband Tim was a public defender and worked in the legal aid clinic. I interviewed him for a paper I did at SCOOP, the Seminary Consortium for Urban Pastoral Education, along with, there's all kinds of lawyers at that church. There was it was all on the legal system. So he helped me outline my thinking as far as that was concerned, because it was a big thing to look at. So and that is a great preacher. I love listening to her preach.
Absolutely. Great.
As are you. You are a very good preacher as well. I've heard you preach a couple of times. So I really do enjoy it. My guest today is Reverend Carol Howard Merritt. She is the author of Healing Spiritual Wounds, Reconnecting with a Loving God After Experiencing a Hurtful Church. And we've been talking a lot about biography and a person's story and how it interacts with their ability to find a loving God. And this is an important thing. One of the, when you were talking about the importance of, my favorite quotes from Calvin actually comes from the Institutes. It says that the chief purpose of a human being, and I'm making it generic so that it can kind of be more inclusive, but the chief purpose of a human being is to love God and to enjoy God forever. And you don't do that when you're caught inside of that hurtful experience of the church. Your enjoyment of God is kind of clouded by your own personal hurt. And so how do you reconcile that in a person's life?
You know, when somebody has been wounded by the church, one of the very first things that you have to do is sort of untangle that woundedness from their image of God. So there is oftentimes this idea that the pastor is the stand-in for God, or people, sense that the church is some stand-in for God. And so they begin to have this idea and concept of God, that God is angry and judgmental and God is hurtful. And so it's important to make sure that you untangle those things. And I think that idea of enjoyment of God is just beautiful as we think about who God is and our image of God, what we grew up with.
Carol, it was so great to have you on Encounter today, and I want to commend your book, and I know that you're working on a book on Julian of Norwich. It's going to be coming out relatively soon. People can look forward to seeing that as well. So thank you for being on Encounter, and I just want to conclude with reading a poem or a prayer that is featured prominently within her book. It's a prayer by Howard Thurman. It said, Lord, open unto me light for my darkness, open unto me courage for my fear, open unto me hope for my despair, open unto me peace for my turmoil, open unto me joy for my sorrow, open unto me strength for my weakness, open unto me wisdom for my confession, open unto me forgiveness for my sins, open unto me love for my hates, open unto me thyself for myself. Lord, Lord, open unto me. Amen. May you find God's joy and God's peace in your life today. Thanks for watching.